Nationwide protests over police brutality.
Over the last 10 years, sea levels have risen at an alarming rate.
Western wildfires about the size of New Jersey.
Devastating unemployment nationwide.
Have I done a good job?
2,777 COVID deaths.
Have I done a good job?
With faith in America and in each other, let us be the nation that we know we can be.
Happy New Year, and welcome to Democracy on the Brink. I'm your host, Santita Jackson, and it is a joy to be with you in this new year, 2021. And what a powerful beginning this new year has already had. We've seen history made on Tuesday. The first African-American man to go to the U.S. Senate from the great state of Georgia, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, won his seat. And he's joined by Jon Ossoff, the son of immigrants, 33 years of age. Young Jewish American, young African-American men going to the U.S. Senate together, just as they campaigned together. And on the Wednesday, though, we saw something that was shocking, that was stunning, and indeed we saw democracy on the brink. We saw the President of the United States, the sitting President, Donald Trump, lead his supporters on a march up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol, but they didn't stop there. They occupied the Capitol, they broke into the Capitol, they broke windows. And so many of us walked away from the day wondering, as we were waiting to see the elections of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris certified, where was all of this going to go? Were we going to see their certification? Well, after the occupation ended, and after 4 people lost their lives, indeed a 5th person lost his life earlier today, we did see the certification of Joe Biden. He is the president-elect. Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect. Our democracy did hold, but it was challenged. And we're going to talk to 3 people about this today who will help us to make sense of it all. Reverend Dr. WilliamBarber, a repairer of the breach, Moral Mondays, the Poor People's Campaign. He's going to help us to understand what we've seen and how we can eradicate poverty and have a livable wage, a prosperity wage for every American. Latasha Brown, she and Stacey Abrams and so many others, so many nameless, faceless people led the charge that gave us Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock as the senators from Georgia. And Ciaran O'Connor, Braver Angels, bringing red and blue America together. Depolarizing America, something that we need desperately in this moment. So please stay right there, but we also want you to be engaged with us. Follow us on social media. Let us know what you're thinking. We want to know what you think of this show. We want to know what you thought of what happened this week. So much has happened. So much is happening. So much is going to happen. And you're at the center of it all. Stay right there. What a blessing it is to begin this new year with this great prophet, this man who's taken the pulpit into the public square, Reverend Dr. WilliamBarber II, my dear, dear old friend, lifelong friend. How are you today?
I am well. I'm well, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you for what you and your family have given to this country and to this world. I'm always blessed to talk to the Jacksons and your father and you and any of you.
Thank you so much. And we feel the same way about the Barbers. You know, we go back a long, long, long ways. And so grateful to see you carrying on the great tradition of the Barber family. Having said that, you know, we've seen a lot, Reverend Dr. Barber. And this week, you know, we were twinned by 2 incredible moments. But let me start with Wednesday. With this insurrection, if you will. Some people are calling it chaos. Some people are calling it a coup at the U.S. Capitol, at the center of our government. What do you make of what we saw? I mean, people are saying that we haven't seen anything like this since 1812, but you took umbrage with that.
I did, because for the last 4 years, on top of many years, we have seen a lot of policy violence and a lot of lies that when you sow them, when they're pushed to the nth degree, this is where they end up. There's some that have made the statement, we had not seen this since 1812. But when it comes to terror and mob action, that would be to look over all the ways in which Native American people were terrorized and mobs were killed, and how their sacred spaces were abused and vandalized, and how they were murdered. It would be to overlook all of the terror that the slaves went through. It would be to look over the terror that the abolitionists faced. When you talk about sacred spaces, I hear people calling the Capitol a temple, but when you think about all of the churches that have been burned, when you think about, it was in 1861 at the Electoral College counting for Abraham Lincoln, 7 states seceded from the Union before that counting and 4 afterwards. And I could go down the line of history, whether it be Tulsa, whether it's the Wilmington terrorist riots in 1898, whether it is the Black men coming back from World War I, or 1919 in the middle of another pandemic when we had Red Summer, where people were literally being run out of communities. I mean, how long do we have to go but bombs were dropped from planes in Tulsa. We could talk about Roseville. I could continue to go on. So we have to be careful when we say things like we've never seen this before, just like with this president. We've seen this before. We've seen racists in the White House, President Johnson, his idol, or President Woodrow Wilson, who played Birth of a Nation that honored the Ku Klux Klan in the Oval Office and declared it was the kind of history that we needed to pay attention to. And he was a straight up racist and lied to us in a pandemic and got 650,000 people killed in a pandemic, blamed it on Spanish people instead of it calling it what it was, the swine flu. He bought the Spanish flu. So no, we cannot ever say we've never seen this before. What happened on Wednesday is that Congress people of every party experienced what Black and brown and indigenous people have experienced far too often in this country.
In America, that is something that we disconnect from. Some of us have experienced it, have experienced just what you recounted, and others have not. And we feel that we have 2 separate histories, but isn't it one history?
It is one history. And one of the things I said in a taping, it is the most, to me, a very dangerous way of verbalizing this, to say this is not American. Now, it is un-American if you follow the Constitution and our greatest moral and religious values to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, or the biblical values of love, truth, and justice and unity. But it is not wrong. You cannot say that this is non-American because there are too many expressions of it. Who do we think they were? Ghosts that somehow come? These were Americans. This violence is very much a part of who we are. And until we own that and repent of it and deal with it, I mean, the level of privilege that these folk thought they had the right. In fact, let me just say this. 2 years ago, your father, myself, some rabbis, we went in, and about 100 people went into the Capitol to pray. We had permits, we had plans, we went in to pray because McConnell would not meet with us about dealing with the issue of poverty. We were handcuffed while praying. So, I've been arrested there 4 times for praying, locked up, had to pay a fine for praying. So the privilege that we saw is there's a set of Americans that feel like they can do whatever they want to. If it means locking up Latinos at the border and putting them in cages and losing their babies, they can do that. If it means killing Black men or women, innocent, unarmed, on camera, with lynching them by knee or by killing them by bullet, they can do that. There is a certain privilege they think they have, and it is very much American. And if we don't admit it, it's not all of America, but it certainly is not Russia, it's not China, it's not Mars, it's not Jupiter. It is America, and it's deep in our history.
Would you not say that that is one of the breach that needs to be repaired, one of the breaches that needs to be repaired in America? This separation of history, this unwillingness to acknowledge all of who we are.
It is indeed, because as one of my professors said, if you don't own all your history and deal with all your history, you will never be whole and complete. But it also says something to us when we think about movements. You know, people often say that the slaves fought for freedom. They fought for freedom first, but freedom wasn't enough. They wanted full citizenship. They wanted full citizenship. They wanted equal protection under the law for all people. And what we continue to say, my dear friend Eddie Glaude mentioned the other day, we have tenuous citizenship for far too many people. And we have tenuous protection for far too few people.
When we look at Wednesday, we have been jolted, Reverend Dr. Barber. And I think that as a man of the cloth, you can help us with this, because you had the low of the insurgency on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, but then you also had the high of the democracy actually working. We got President Biden through. We got Vice President-elect Harris and President-elect Biden. We were finally able to complete that vote. And on the other side of that, we have Tuesday, which is really an outgrowth of your Moral Mondays, the Southern Crusade of Reverend Jackson in 1983. We can go back to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and on and on and on. This relay race, you all just keep on, we all keep running it. How do you twin? First of all, let me separate this out. Georgia, that Senate race, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, John Ossoff. What do you make of that win? Those wins and that team effort, because they campaigned together, which was wonderful to see.
Now, isn't that interesting that election of those two particular persons, a Black preacher and a very open Jewish white brother, running in the South on a fairly progressive agenda, saying, elect us, we're going to address systemic racism, we're going to give you $15 in a union in a non-union state or union resisting state, and we're going to expand healthcare even more. Saying that to the 1.9 million poor and low wealth people in Georgia who make less than a living wage right now today, the 48% of Georgians that are poor and low wealth. Notice I didn't just say Black Georgians, 48% of Georgians. And the 1 million Georgians that don't have health care because Georgia resisted expanding health care. And to run on a progressive agenda, 10 years of work underneath that, building out a new electorate with my dear friend, Stacey Abrams, the work we did in North Carolina in 2008, because that was the first breakage when Obama won North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia in 2008, and a new electorate, what we call a fusion electorate, came together that was similar to the electorates in the South between 1878 and 1876 and 77, when few Black and white came together after the Civil War. This is what you're seeing. You know, some people say it was the Black vote. I think it was the Black vote, but even if all Black people voted, that's only 29%. So it was Black folk, it was white people that said we're no longer going to accept the divisions and the illusions of the Southern strategy. And it was brown people and some indigenous people all coming together and voting for candidates running in a progressive way, and they won in Georgia. And Georgia doesn't have to be an anomaly. Your father and I and others keep saying the South is not really red, it's unorganized. Democrats haven't spent the kind of time. this election showed, I'm organizing, this election shows when you put the right message with the right mobilization, with the right movement, with the right people, you can win in the South. And this is serious, because unless you break the South open fully, then you always leave open the window for these despots like Trump, because if they can guarantee from Virginia to Texas, that's 13 states, that's 170 electoral votes before one is cast. But if you switch that, that's what this signals, the kind of a third reconstruction beginning to happen. That's not just about new policies, but new people in place making those policies. And when you think about that, it is exactly what was needed for the saving of this nation in this particular historical moment. I want folk to be clear that Black people, and by the way, we have data now that shows that 14% of poor and low wealth people, 14% more than voted for Trump, voted for Biden-Harris. 55% of poor and low wealth people voted for the Biden-Harris ticket, and it's probably going to be similar for Warnock and Ossoff. So Black people, brown people, progressive white people, and poor and low wealth people have saved this nation once again. Once again.
Will the South? Will the politics of this new emerging South that's been emerging for decades now, and you've been part of this race with the Moral Mondays, with the understanding of what voter registration, what voter suppression feels like, what voter registration, what we need to do in the South. Can this, you say it can save the nation, how can it save the North, the Rust Belt? How can it save the Northeast? How can it save the West? How can it save the Southwest? What does the South have to teach the rest of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Democrats are going to have to understand that you can't win with a so-called blue wall that doesn't come through the South. That's almost setting yourself up for sometimes victories, but most of the time losses. Secondly, what the South can do, particularly Ossoff and Warnock, they have the unique opportunity to put issues at the forefront of the political agenda. 1/3 of all poor people live in the South. 1/3 of all poor and low wealth white people live in the South. So if there is a push from the South and that push addresses poverty, it's going to help people in the North and the West, because there's not a county in this country today where you can work at a minimum wage job and afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. If we raise the living wage to $15 in the union right now, 39 million people would come up out of poverty. 73 million people families would be affected. We have 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country right now. 66 million of them are white, 26 million are Black, but that's 61% of Black people. If the South pushes, which is the home of healthcare denial, pushes for universal healthcare, then the folk in the North and the West win. In the South, we know that since 2010, 26 states, mostly in the South, have passed racist voter suppression laws. Every state that is a racist voter suppression law is also an anti-union state, an anti-living wage state, a denial of healthcare state, an anti-immigrant state. So and most of those in the South, so if you change the South and who gets elected, and then you change the election laws to undermine voter suppression, and then you expand the vote, because right now in the US Senate, the majority of the people that are of course it's a different majority by one now, but the majority of the Republican senators come from states that have the least amount of population, but the highest poverty. And yet they have the most regressive attitudes. And so the South can lead in policy in a new way, in a way that will benefit all of America. That's why recently in the Poor People's Campaign, we put forward a first 50 to 100 day plan. And it was based on, we need comprehensive COVID response and just and We got to have infrastructure development and living wages and protection from people being kicked out of their homes and kicked out of their apartments. And we need to, deal with the essential workers having their protections and insurance. Because what a lot of people missed, even in COVID, is that while Black and brown people are dying 3 to 5 times disproportionately, if you dig in the numbers, Sister Jackson, poor folk, poor Black people are dying. Poor and low wealth Black people are dying. Poor and low wealth Latinos are dying. Poor and low wealth white people are dying. And do you know that's the measurement that they're not even keeping? My daughter's a PhD in public health. She said, Daddy, they're not even keeping the measurement on the economic, on the death factor based on economics, on the infection factor based on economics. But we know that before COVID, there were 43% of this nation was poor and low wealth, 43%. Since May of last year, over 8 million new people have been added to the poverty rolls. The South has a specific voice when it comes to poverty, when it comes to the intersections between systemic racism and systemic poverty. Lastly, Dr. King said in 1965, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, he said every time there is the possibility for the Negro poor masses and the Negro white masses, I'm paraphrasing, to come together and form political power, the aristocracy sows division. He said that was the basis of the segregated society, to keep poor Black folk and poor white folk from coming together as allies and forming a power base. And the South can teach the nation how to do fusion politics. And if the nation ever learns that, extremists won't have a chance. We won't put them out of the country. We'll just sit them on the back seat.
In about 30 seconds, can you tell me how we can find common ground and then find the higher moral ground?
Well, one of the things is look at what happened real quickly. On Wednesday night, we had a step toward the third Reconstruction. On Wednesday morning, we had Ted Cruz arguing from the perspective of the philosophy that ended the first Reconstruction. I mean, he was arguing what happened in 1876, which sought to end the first Reconstruction between 1865 and 1876. We must expose those lies if we're going to go forward. Kumbaya alone is not going to take us forward. Secondly, you can't heal the nation's spirit without healing the body. The body is sick with racism and poverty and ecological devastation, denial of healthcare, and a war economy where we still spend 54 cents of every discretionary dollar in the war machinery and less than 16 cents of every discretionary dollar on education, healthcare, and infrastructure. We must heal the body. I said to President Biden and elect Biden and Vice President Harris, the hope is in the morning. Not M-O-R-N-I-N-G, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. He said, what do you mean? I said, address where people are mourning, address their pain, and that's what will bring hope back to the nation. You must address the body, and you can't wait 3 or 4 years. Democrats now have a majority, 1 vote, but that's all you need. They must pass policies quickly that address the mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. And if they do, America will see a new morning, M-O-R-N-I-N-G.
Reverend Dr. William Barber II, thank you for being used for the highest purpose. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Well, all eyes once again on Georgia with the Senate runoff election and history once again being made. 4.4 million voters cast their ballots in a Senate runoff election, unprecedented numbers. And Reverend Raphael Warnock will be the first Black senator from Georgia. Well, joining us today to talk about this is Latasha Brown, the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. Latasha, I know it's been a long night. In fact, it's been a very long year for you, so we really appreciate you being with us on Free Speech TV. What's your initial reaction? As I said, Raphael Warnock, the first Black senator from Georgia. The other Senate runoff race at this point still too close to call, albeit that Jon Ossoff is in the lead. How are you feeling today?
So I'm feeling resolved. I'm feeling resolved today. I'm feeling very anchored. I'm feeling a sense of joy, of what we've worked very, very hard. And so many people have worked so hard for this, and not just the work that we have been doing, but this has been a continuous process. Here it is, we are 400 years past when the first Africans were brought enslaved to these shores. And so this has been an ongoing struggle to make sure that we have representation and make sure that we have democracy, particularly from the old Confederate South. And so to have an African-American male who is a minister that comes out of the prophetic tradition of faith in the Black community, to be going to the U.S. Senate is nothing short, but it almost feels like poetic justice to come out of Georgia. And so I feel really resolved in the sense that, there are three words that wrap all of this up for me. It is Black voters matter. That ultimately Black voters matter, and we matter everywhere, not just in the metro area, but in the rural areas, in the cracks and crannies and crevices of deep rural Georgia, in those counties that people had written off saying that they were red counties, and those are not counties. They don't have the numbers. Those people, there were rural Black Georgians that actually made the difference, that pulled it up. They were able to offset the Republican turnout in those same counties. And so, I feel very, very reflective today around, and very happy about what we were able to do and accomplish, but also very resolved that this is one part of a longer struggle, that until we literally are able to transform our communities, till we're able to really be able to have the representation so that we can get the power and the resources to our community, we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, we know, given the history of the Republican Party contesting still the presidential election results, we know that this is just the beginning in terms of the Senate runoff election. But those Black voters who have showed up once again at the ballots to cast their votes, this is happening despite the most egregious efforts to suppress the vote in the state of Georgia. And I know that Black Voters Matter is just one of the groups involved in a lawsuit against those efforts. And so take us through exactly the obstacles that voters have had to overcome to actually even be able to cast a vote.
I want listeners to know how extraordinary this moment is, that what we saw is there were more Black votes that were cast in this election ever in the history of this country, in any state. That is just in a runoff election. The significance of that is that the runoff process, election process itself, was actually created to disenfranchise and to minimize the impact of Black voters would have on statewide offices, being elected. That fundamentally, matter of fact, the elected that created and designed the runoff election process said, quote, "This is to disrupt the Negro voting bloc." That the entire purpose of it. So here it is in the very context, in the very process which was designed to disenfranchise us and have a disadvantage, in the very state that was ground zero for voter suppression in 2018 that the whole nation was witnessed, in a region that the enslavement of Africans led to the enormous population of Black people throughout the South, that for it to happen here in this moment when there is a racist, misogynist president that is in office that has been using this whole racist trope to really organize folks, is so poetic. And so when we're looking at voter suppression, I guess I want people to understand that it's never stopped, that it never stopped I can go from Reconstruction on down, it's never stopped, but it takes different forms. What we've seen most recently, which is a part of the lawsuit that you referred to, is in 2019, while we witnessed 2018, the massive purging of voters, which ultimately led to Stacey Abrams not rightfully getting the position that she actually worked hard for and should have received. That in 2019, right after that, Raffensperger dropped 328,000 people from the voting rolls. Of those 328,000, 198,000 people were dropped under the guise that they had moved. They were no longer living at their place of residence. An investigative journalist that we work with and partner with, Greg Pallas, along with an expert team that they do a lot of work around data hygiene and making sure that lists are correct and accurate. They do work for Fortune 500 companies like Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and others. And when they checked the list, they immediately saw that there were 60,000 voters that never should have been taken off, that they couldn't find out the information. They looked the list at and compared it with over 200 different sources and discovered that of that list, 198,000 people had never moved and were dropped from the voting rolls. There was a report that the ACLU of Georgia came out with in September, literally documenting that and showing, and actually we reached out to the Secretary of State's office to ask to sit down to try to figure out how can our experts sit with his experts to figure out how could you be 200,000 people off? And I want people to be mindful, this is 6 months before the presidential primary, the 2020 presidential primary, right? And so of those 198,000 people, none of those people were restored to the voting rolls. Even though he did not even meet the basic requirement in the National Registration Act that says that you have to have a third-party licensee of an official licensee of the Postal Service to verify that those names, that list is correct. He did not even meet that basic requirement in the National Registration Act. You know why? Because he didn't care. You know why? Because he didn't think anybody would hold him accountable. You know why? Because there is a history of voter suppression that has gone unchecked and unpunished in this state. And so part of the way that we found the best way to beat voter suppression is that you've got to beat it by death by 1,000 cuts. That oftentimes you got to take it in the court system. We've got to get on the streets and make sure that the laws, that folks hold people accountable, that we have people that are going to meetings when the electors meet, the election boards meet in the different counties. But one of the most effective ways is we have to out-organize them and make sure that we overperform. And that's what happened in Georgia. There was an overperformance of Black voters, which essentially means more Black voters were made a larger part of the voter share than our actual population percentage in the state. Black people showed up and showed out in this election. And that's why we're going to have 2 new senators coming from the state of Georgia that are literally going to give the Democratic Party and the Democrats an advantage to be able to govern. And when they govern, we expect them to govern just as we showed up for them. We expect that there will be an agenda that will also show up for working class and poor people and disenfranchised people in this country.
Well, in terms of the Georgia Secretary of State and his role in voter suppression, so much attention being paid to the infamous phone call made by Donald Trump this past weekend to Brad Raffensperger, basically telling him, find me more than 11,000 votes so I can overturn this election. He's being hailed, Brad Raffensperger, almost as a hero by certain quarters, as if upholding the law is something to be labeled a hero. He's an elected official, my goodness. But the efforts that he has been involved in voter suppression and will continue to be involved in, because he has said that he will support Republican efforts in Georgia to stop or to limit mail-in voting that has been so successful in not just the Senate runoff, but the presidential election as well. And so we really need to, it seems, refocus the conversation on what exactly is happening around voter access in Georgia.
Absolutely. He has been an obstructionist. He has been the number one. He has been complicit in this process. The only difference is that he was not willing to go to jail and commit a crime with Donald Trump. He's done everything within the context of his abuse of power in his office to disenfranchise voters. What we've seen in the South, we've always seen white power be abused. And just because at one point in this country, lynching was legal. At one point in this country, literally being able to burn people at the stake was legal. Because it's legal doesn't mean that it's right? And so what he has done is he has found a context, as they have always done, in the Deep South to be able to legalize ways to disenfranchise, to create legal tools to disenfranchise Black voters. That is why there's the point of the voter ID. That's the point of all of these other mechanisms that we've seen being put in place, right? The exact match, that if you don't sign your name exactly like you signed it when you registered, we can throw out your vote. All of those elements are elements to really be able to create a racist structural barrier for Black voters. What they severely underestimated is that those of us who live in the South, we expect that. And so those of us that live in the South are actually committed to fighting that on every front. And what we did essentially in this election, while we fought on the other fronts, as we're continuing to fight in the court system, we out-organized them. And so Raffensperger, not only is he not a hero, he is a part of the problem. He is complicit. The only distinction in this particular circumstance is that Trump clearly was asking him to do something that was criminal, that he was clearly asking him to do something that he could face criminal charges, and he was not willing to go that far. That is the only difference between, if there was a way that he could find those votes without the threat of literally committing a crime or without the threat of he would have criminal charges, I am quite confident that he would have done so. And part of what he did, as we were talking about the 198,000 people, that was Raffensperger. And when we actually, at the way the court case is now, the judge did not give us injunctive relief. We wanted injunctive relief to be able to get those voters restored. But because the election was going on, the judge didn't want the courts to interfere in that way. But he also encouraged us to sit down with the Secretary of State, with Raffensperger's office, as well as our experts, to try to work this out. We've not heard anything from him. He has been complicit in supporting the disenfranchisement of voters, and he's next. We're literally coming for him. We're going to hold him accountable as well.
Well, in terms of what's at stake, not just for Georgia, but indeed the entire country with the Senate runoff election, of course, in a very immediate sense, there's the COVID relief payments. So many people struggling really economically, in terms of their health, not just because of COVID, but because of years of policies that have disenfranchised the poor and the working class. The Institute for Policy Studies says that 48% of Georgians are poor or low income, and yet there have been billionaires who have been sent to represent the state up until this point. And then you have a candidate like Reverend Warnock with progressive positions on how to tackle those issues being labeled as a radical. So how does this relate to the voter suppression strategies that the people who need proper representation have not up until this point had those people with their best interests at heart actually representing them?
So, I think a critical mistake that the Republicans made is they overplayed their hand. They treated people as if they were stupid. They treated people as if they could not see between the lines. What's really poetic is that the wealthiest person in Congress, the wealthiest congressperson, the wealthiest senator is actually Senator Loeffler. And so here she was defeated by the first African-American that came from a poor community, one of 12 children. He constantly talks about that, a working class family that literally he was able to topple her. You know why? Because his experience has shaped his value system, and her experiences have obviously shaped hers. She cares about herself. She cares about her own resources and literally an agenda that's going to support her and the wealthy. And what we see with Pastor Warnock, who will be Senator-elect Reverend Warnock, is that he has had a message that was inclusive of everybody, not just Black voters, but white voters and working class and middle class and those who were business owners and the very poor. And so that inclusive message, I think, resonated with people. And that is what is going to make the difference. When people are organized, when people really exert themselves and their power, they can even overcome voter suppression. And so it does not mean that we don't fight it and to eliminate, because it does make a much heavier and harder pull, but it is possible.
Well, just as we finish up, Latasha, I was glued to your Twitter feed last night, and I encourage everybody to follow you on Twitter for information, but also for inspiration. And one of the tweets that you shared last night was from a voter who just turned 18 just prior to the Senate runoff, saying that you have changed their attitude toward politics and their attitude towards themselves and political engagement. So as we finish up, you said that this is your life's work, this is your legacy. So what does that mean for you, and what does the legacy look like as we go forward now?
You know, for me, a win looks like, of course, we want a political win. That's why we work so hard. But more important than that, I want people to believe in their own power, their own sense of agency, because I do believe that when people rise up in this country, things will change. The whole political landscape will change. The level and quality of elected officials that we have will change. You know, the policy will change. And so what I have most hope in this country is not in the system. I have hope in the people of this country. And that young man, that 18-year-old that said he had never seen anyone come to his community. And because of meeting us and because of his experience that he had and the way that he was introduced to the process, that he realized that his voice and his vote mattered. At the end of the day, if we haven't done anything else but could remind people that they have power and in fact that they matter, we have won. We have accomplished our goals.
Well, Latasha Brown with the Black Voters Matter Fund, co-founder, thank you so much for being with us today on Free Speech TV.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
America is increasingly divided, as we have seen. There are many, many organizations and individuals who are working to help us bridge those divisions. One of the groups that we're looking at on our show is Braver Angels. And joining us now is Ciaran O'Connor of Braver Angels. Ciaran, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Maeve. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, formerly you were known as Better Angels, and that's a reference to the inauguration speech given by Abraham Lincoln. Take us through that, the origins of the group and what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. So Abraham Lincoln took office in 1861, and the country was on the brink of a civil war. And the notion of our better angels, the better angels of our nature, is this idea that we have our better angels, our better selves, a higher fidelity, a higher partisanship to the Union, not just to our political side or our political tribe. And after the 2016 election, we wanted to bring this idea to the current American political arena, where people no longer see their political opponents as simply wrong or misguided, but they see them as enemies. And we've seen what's happened in the past 4 years as the level of polarization has increased even further, to the point that there's a real threat of a serious division and cleavage in American society that could result in violence.
Well, I know when you say we, that you're coming from a political background yourself, and your colleagues at Braver Angels are as well. I know you were in the Obama administration, but you're working with folks who would consider themselves to be Republicans, but also Trump supporters. So how did those conversations even begin, given the polarizing that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Braver Angels is truly bipartisan, and we're not trying to necessarily get people to agree. So we don't ask people to check their passions at the door. We welcome anyone, really, so long as they're willing to come in good faith. So that could be, people on the far left, socialists, Black Lives Matter, and people on the far right, and supporters of President Trump. So long as people also have a respect for keeping the country together and rejecting violence. And we believe that by better understanding each other's perspectives, even if, and perhaps especially when you don't agree with them, that's how you can start to build the trust needed to work together and to find the sorts of solutions that our democracy requires us to make if we're going to continue to be in a union with people, even when we find their views mystifying or even appalling.
So how do you find that starting point? Because as we have been discussing and as you've laid out there, people don't just see others on with an opposing political viewpoint as somebody who that they disagree with. There's a hatred almost. It's a visceral thing. There are lots and lots of statistics about that and where we are right now. How do you even find that starting point where that respectful dialogue can even begin?
Sure. Well, at the very basic level, it starts with exposure, because increasingly Americans live in very like-minded communities. So they're only really surrounded with people that they agree with or that they consider part of their tribe. And this trend gets exacerbated when people are spending so much time online, where they're following news and content that really just confirms their pre-existing worldviews and biases. Granted, a lot of people don't have that luxury. They come from families that are politically divided or workplaces that are politically divided. And so it starts with bringing people together. Even that can be a revolutionary act in today's climate. The second thing that's really important is structure and process for having that sort of engagement. Because if you just bring together someone who's a diehard Trump supporter and someone who thinks that Trump is a vital threat to American democracy and tell them to debate the election, it's probably going to be counterproductive. But if you bring them together with a structure and you give them an opportunity not to necessarily debate right off the bat, but to better understand each other as people and each other's perspectives through their lived experience, that's when you start to clarify where the disagreements actually lie. You start to break down the stereotype thinking. And again, you start to build a little bit of trust. And it's trust that really keeps our society together and keeps our democracy functioning. And so when we just live in these mutually antagonistic echo chambers, we get pulled further apart, and the incentives to try to work together become increasingly perverse, and you start to see the dysfunction and vitriol that animates our politics today.
Well, you mentioned those echo chambers, and earlier you mentioned social media. Of course, so many people are siloed in these echo chambers, whether it's on social media and the information or misinformation that they may be getting there, but also mainstream media is increasingly polarized as well, and many people just consuming media that reinforces their own opinions. So how do you create those structures where people can be exposed and can be introduced to people with different opinions that they have, and that they can have these respectful dialogues?
Yeah, so our approach is actually rooted in family therapy and particularly couples therapy. It was designed by a longtime psychotherapist, Bill Doherty, who specializes in working with couples who are on the brink of divorce and want to take one last shot at saving their marriage. And so a lot of those techniques for communicating across the divide and communicating in a way where people feel heard have been transposed onto politics. But again, I would just emphasize that fundamentally it starts at a human level and how we treat each other before we sort of get into policy issues or discussions around which candidate we should vote for.
I know that you have a podcast, you do a lot of interviews. I know you've spoken at college campuses as well. And so you're really out there getting a sense of how this is playing out in our society. What are you hearing, and what are you hearing from different communities about the polarization that they're experiencing and their opinions of folks on the opposite side of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of fear and anger out there, but there's also exhaustion, and there's an appetite for what we're doing because people recognize that this is a problem. I think the central tension that people on both the left and the right feel is, can I get involved with this work? Can I get involved with Braver Angels? Can I talk to someone on the other side without compromising my values? Because there's a fear these days, and it's reinforced by tribal orthodoxy, which is that, somehow engaging with a different perspective is the same thing as surrendering your own perspective. We believe that's not the case. We believe that actually engaging with different perspectives is what makes for progress. And it actually paradoxically improves your ability to advocate for your own positions if you can better understand where the other side is coming from, if your goal is to try to persuade. But at a fundamental level, we really just want to increase empathy, understanding, and goodwill so that we can try to reduce some of the rancor that's built up over the past 4 years. And again, just the last point I would make is we don't ask people to try to moderate their views. I have my own views about why we're so polarized, and I don't want to let anyone off the hook who I feel like is further polarizing us, from ordinary people to our high-level politicians. But I do believe there is value in trying to work with people you don't agree with. And at the end of the day, it oftentimes makes more conversations interesting than if you're just sitting around, dumping on all the politicians you don't like, which is what you see a lot of on Twitter.
I mean, I think you framed it very well there. And I think so much of our communication is now people going into it with a zero-sum idea that I will win this argument or I will lose this argument, but there's no middle ground. There's no nuance where maybe I will stay strong in my position, but I'll gain some type of understanding. And so much of our communication is, I think, deteriorated because of the anonymity that social media affords. So how do, say, your forums actually play out? And especially now with COVID, I mean, are they moderated? How do people engage in those respectful forums, given everything that you've just outlined?
Yeah, I mean, again, structure is really key. And one of our most popular pieces of programming in 2020 was Braver Angels Debates. This is where we sort of take our approach to cross-partisan dialogue that began with our Red Blue Workshop. The Red Blue Workshop is really about giving each side an opportunity to listen and be heard. Braver Angels Debates, on the other hand, are an opportunity to actually debate and argue about these divisive issues where there are deep disagreements, but to do it in the Braver Angels way that sort of privileges passion over vitriol, vigor over rancor. So it is very structured. It is moderated. There is a debate chair who's essentially calling on people to make their points. But we really do encourage people to speak fully and speak passionately, but also speak from personal experience, not just to get up there and parrot the talking points that they heard on their favorite cable news show, but to talk from their own lived experience about why they feel the way they do, because that's what really reaches people. When people can understand where you are coming from, that you believe a certain thing, and you can sort of start to untangle with a little bit more nuance the various shades of an issue. And so nobody wins in a Braver Angels debate, but ideally everyone walks out a little bit closer to the truth and with closer community relationships that can keep the conversation going.
Is this a bottom-up approach or trickle-down approach, or somewhere in the middle? Because right now a lot of the division we're seeing coming from trickle down, with the people in the highest office in the land sowing the seeds of division. And so how do we have this type of communication at all levels, or does it really have to come from a grassroots and trickle up approach?
We are very much bottom up and decentralized. And so since we started in 2016, we've really been focused on working at the individual, the family, and the community level to build up this citizens movement of ordinary Americans who are taking a stand for the country because they're concerned about what's happening, and they think that we need to change course, not necessarily when it comes to policies, because people have different ideas about where we should go in terms of policy, but we need to change course in terms of how we treat each other and how the social fabric is being maintained. And now that we're moving into 2021, that our movement has grown, Now we want to start thinking about how can we bubble up to affect the institutions of American life that influence our political culture, be it the media or academia or politics themselves. And so we've started doing some workshops with members of Congress, various state legislatures, and one day maybe Braver Angels could moderate a presidential debate that's a little bit different from what people are used to seeing, where it's about, which candidate can get in a good zinger.
Well, as we do move forward, this animosity that many people feel, this actual hatred many people are feeling right now, and fear, it's not going to go away after Inauguration Day. So what can people do as we move forward? What resources do you have for folks who may be watching right now and would like to have some of these dialogues and respectful forums in their own communities and maybe even in their own families?
Yes, absolutely. Again, Braver Angels is a citizens movement. We have plenty of opportunities for people to engage, whether it's joining a discussion, joining a debate, having a one-on-one conversation with someone in a different part of the country. And because of the COVID pandemic, we've brought all of our programming online. So, all you really need if you want to engage in a conversation is an hour or two on Zoom. A lot of people who get involved with Braver Angels then want to become more involved, to get trained as moderators, to join a local alliance, to become a state coordinator, because at the end of the day, we really are a volunteer-led movement that is powered by the people.
And I know people can find out more about the work, connect with your organization, find out about the podcast and many other offerings that you have at your website, braverangels.org.
That's right. And I hope to see everyone there.
Ciaran O'Connor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Maeve.
We here at Democracy on the Brink want to thank you for tuning in to this show. We want to thank Reverend Dr. WilliamBarber for being a part of the show, and Latasha Brown and Ciaran O'Connor. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your lives. Thank you for being in service to all of us. Thank you for inspiring all of us to do our part. And we want you to do your part. Please participate with us in social media. Let us know what you thought of this show. Let us know what you thought of this week's events. Remember, the election of 2020 was the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. If you did not believe that, think of all that happened in this past week. It lets us know that we all have powerful voices and that each and every one of us will be required to make this lift, to make this journey toward a more perfect union. I'm Santita Jackson. This is Democracy on the Brink.